Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting on Monday, the 2nd of October 2023, on a glorious spring day. For those who are watching along at home, my name is Paula Reid. I have the pleasure of being the Mayor of Kingborough. We don't have anyone in the public gallery this evening, but to those watching at home via YouTube, a very warm welcome to you. Being 5:30 p.m, I now officially declare the meeting open. I wish to advise that council meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website. In accordance with council's policy, I'll ask the General Manager to confirm that the audio recording has started.
Confirm, Mayor.
Thank you. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Our attendees this evening are myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor Councillor Gladwright, Councillor Antoli, Councillor Bain, Councillor Cordova, Councillor Dean, Councillor Fox, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Street. From our staff this evening, we have the General Manager, Mr Arnold, the Director of Governance, Recreation and Property Services, Mr Smee, Director of Engineering Services, Mr Reeve, the Acting Director of Environment, Development and Community Services, Ms Salisbury, our Media and Communications Advisor, Ms Adams, our Manager of Transform Kingston, Mr Kamet-Soglu, and our Executive Assistant, Mrs Morton. We have apologies this evening from Councillor Midgley. We're on page 1 now, and the motion is that the minutes of the open session of Council meeting number 18, held on the 18th of September 2023, be confirmed as a true record. Looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Street. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Still on page 1, the workshops held since the last council meeting. We had a workshop last Monday evening, the 25th of September, in relation to the AFL High Performance Centre. Declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a declaration of interest? No, thank you. And still on page 2, is there any item on the agenda that a councillor would like to move from closed into open session or open into closed session? No, thank you very much. We don't have any members of the public here, so we cannot have any questions without notice from them. And questions on notice, at the time the agenda was compiled, there were no questions on notice from the public. But if anybody who is listening to this would like to put in a question on notice, they can do so by filling out the form on our website, or they can also send an email to kc@kingborough.tas.gov.au. So, it takes us to questions without notice from councillor. Does any councillor have a question? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. My questions are about the opening hours of toilets, public toilets in the municipality. And so I'll preface it by saying that I realise that many of the toilets are closed after dark at the moment, and I realise that that might be to do with an issue to do with vandalism. The point that I'm trying to make is in Kingston Park, for example, those toilets are very well lit, and there are big signs around everywhere that say this area is under constant video surveillance. And I wanted to make the point that the entire rate base is paying for those amenities and therefore hopefully should be able to use them. When there are problems with shoplifting, we don't close all the shops, but now because there's a problem with vandalism, we've closed all the toilets after dark. Since the vandalism is potentially done by a small handful of people whom I assume should be known to police already, particularly with the CCTV and the well-lit areas, there must be something that can be done so that thousands of Kingborough residents aren't punished for the bad actions of just a few troublemakers. So my question is, what is the plan to reopen toilets after dark in areas such as Kingston Park and Kingston Beach? And what are the toilets that are affected by these closures, and what's the plan to reopen them?
I'll ask Mr Smee to talk to that, but just in some opening remarks, it is correct that we've had a substantial amount of vandalism in our public toilets at Blackmans Bay Beach, at not as much at Kingston Beach, but certainly Blackmans Bay Beach, also at not only the community hub ones at Kingston Park, but also the ones in the public open space area. And by substantial, I mean, we're talking probably, I think, last time I checked, in the order of $40,000 to $50,000 of damage had been done over a short space of time. And what's happening with that damage is that it's not just people going in and graffitiing, we're talking destroying whole cubicles, setting fire to things, and making those facilities totally unusable. Unfortunately, the parenting rooms at Kingston Park at the community hub was totally destroyed some time ago, and that took a substantial amount of time for us to repair it. It is correct that we have surveillance, but the surveillance cannot prevent the vandalism being done at the time. It can catch the perpetrators afterwards. But when we're talking about the substantial amount of money that is being devoted from council resources into having to have toilets out of action for a long period of time, but also then the money that's going into paying for those works is very, very disappointing and ultimately a cost to the ratepayers. My understanding is that with the change to daylight savings, then the times that we will close the toilets will be altered to reflect the longer daylight hours. But at the end of the day, we've had a huge problem with the people who have been, and it appears a range of different people in different locations. And so it's very unfortunate that we've had to take this step, but it's not unlike the steps that other councils have taken around the state to close their toilets to prevent the vandalism. But as to more specifics, Mr. Smee, would you like to assist us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, the plan in terms of opening them 24 hours is a very fluid one. We would only do that if we had an indication from the community that there was demand to reopen after hours. And bearing in mind it does only affect facilities at Kingston Park and the Blackmans Bay toilets. And I think, as the Mayor has indicated, the amount of vandalism and damage and the cost of damage has been significant. So, at this point, as the Mayor indicated, we will be opening them for longer during daylight savings, but there is no proposal to reopen on a 24-hour basis unless we had a significant reason to do so.
Thank you. Just one more follow-up, and I do really appreciate the considered response both from the Mayor and the Council Officer, and Mr. Smee. So my question is about Kingston Beach specifically. That to me appears to be the one where there's a lot of activity after dark at Kingston Beach from people who are just enjoying themselves, going to the beach, going for exercise, going to the various restaurants and bars, cafes that are there. So is there a plan around Kingston Beach specifically where we can... I feel like there's more demand at Kingston Beach to have toilets that are available, particularly for the opening hours of places like Salty Dog and Robbie Brown's and those places. While there's definitely people who are moving around that area, walking dogs and going for a jog, why isn't there anything that we can do in terms of either security or what are the options that we have so that we just don't simply lock up these community assets for Kingston Beach specifically?
So once again, before just handing over to Mr. Smee, I think the extension to cover the daylight hours with daylight savings time would certainly cover off on the community being around the Kingston Beach area after hours. And you mentioned the opening hours of some of the restaurants and things there. Well, obviously the patrons of those places will patronise the toilets that are within those facilities. But at the end of the day, it's how much risk do we want to take in incurring further expensive damage to our facilities that then become unusable at other times during the day. And in the case of, as it was for a long period of time up at the community hub, totally without a parenting room because of the extent of the vandalism there. So it's really a matter for weighing that up. I don't know, Mr. Smee, if you'd like to add anything further to that.
Through you, Mayor, the The most obvious solution is an increased security presence. We currently have random patrols, but obviously if we had a more permanent presence from security, that would be an option, but it's a costly one.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay, we will move on then. Questions on notice from councillors. At the time the agenda was compiled, there were no questions on notice from councillors. Still on page 2, there were no petitions still being actioned, and we did not have any petitions received in the last period. So we now are at page 3, Officers' Reports to Council, Mills Reef Park Reserve play equipment with a recommendation on page 5. Looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Antoli and a seconder in Councillor Gladright. Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. This report outlines an earnest request from the Bruny Island Community Association, known as BICA, for council funding to support the installation of essential play equipment at the Mills Reef Community Park. Just a fun fact, Alona was originally named Mills Reef, and that was changed to Alona back in 1909 to preserve the Aboriginal, or half the Aboriginal name for Bruny Island, the full name being Lunawanna-Alona. So we're talking about a park in the Alona area. The initiative, because you can't actually find Mills Creek when you Google it, so it's good to know that. The initiative aligns seamlessly with our key, pardon me, pardon me. Sorry about that, folks. The initiative aligns seamlessly with our key priority area to foster a safe, healthy and connected community, and could offer immeasurable social and recreational benefits. Financially, the project has already garnered considerable community backing, with BICA and grants contributing to about $70,000. And furthermore, they're requesting that they receive funding for $60,000, which the officers' report mentions could come from the public open space account, currently at $232,000. So there is the possibility for support there. The park's development to date has been a sterling example of community action and engagement, involving a range of stakeholders from local schools to community clubs. Inclusion of the project in the 24-25 capital budget is proposed by council officers, and that would allow for a comprehensive assessment and prioritisation, ensuring fiscal responsibility but also aiming to help the strategic development of the community. And I have some questions in a moment, if I may, Mayor, on that date. But given the enthusiastic community involvement, the clear alignment with council's objectives, I strongly advocate for the inclusion of this funding request in at least the 24-25 budget, thereby enriching the community life in Bruny Island. And with that, I would like to ask a question, if I may.
Of course.
I'd love to know from council whether or not they're, given that we have money in the public open space account, and given that this has been going since 2020, if there was provisional capacity for that money to be granted before the 24-25 budget.
Mr. Smee, you could assist us with that one.
Through you, Mayor, council can allocate public open space funds at any time. It just needs a council resolution.
So just a notice of motion, perhaps.
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, yes, a notice of motion or an amendment to this particular recommendation.
Can I just, if I could just add to that, I think the difficulty with that would be that we've tried to follow the process with some rigour this year, because everybody has the pet projects that they would like to promote for sections of the community, and so we have tried to put any requests such as this to be considered for the next budget and in the context of all the competing priorities, because I think it is significant that whilst there are available funds at the moment in the public open space budget, they are dwindling. We don't know with the ones that we've already committed to whether we might have a budget overrun with some of the playground projects, for example. So I think it would be prudent to keep that buffer there as well.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. May I ask a further
Yes.
question or two? When was the proposal to council for contribution made by BICA? When did council approximately receive that request?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, formally received about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so it is recent. So it's not like a request that we've been sitting on for a long time. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Antoli. Councillor Gladright.
I just have a question. Can we also apply for the active infrastructure grant if we include the project as a budget bid?
Mr Smee.
Through you, Mayor, that grant program closes very soon. It needs a 20% applicant contribution, and we already have a project that we intend to apply for. So we could apply in addition to that, but council would need to find the 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that I think it's a good initiative, and the report does outline some of those considerations. I think that it is good that we'll be considering this in the upcoming budget, and it's something that the people of Bruny have clearly want, and it was something that council has essentially undertaken or committed to as a result of the land sales that took place previously. So I do think that it's a good initiative. I do support the initiative, and I look forward to our consideration during the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Any further discussion? Councillor Antoli, did you want to sum up? No? I'm going to put the recommendation then as printed on page 5, moved by Councillor Antoli, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us on to page 6, the Tasmanian Sustainability Strategy, with a recommendation on page 8. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Looks like we've got a mover in the Deputy Mayor and a seconder in Councillor Cordova. Councillor Gladright.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to consider the state government's proposal to develop the Tasmanian Sustainability Strategy. I'm doing the Tasmanian Leaders course this year, and we had a presentation by the state government on this strategy, and it looked really, really positive. And so I support the recommendation that we prepare a submission on behalf of council.
Thank you, Councillor Gladright. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a great privilege to second this. I think it's a good initiative. The Tasmanian Government's committed to the development of a sustainability strategy in consultation with Tasmanians, and now is our opportunity to provide our input for that. And also I note that the submissions do close on the 6th of October, is my understanding, so they're coming up soon. So I recommend that the public and residents of Kingborough who want to get involved also jump on that website, sustainability.tas.gov.au, to have their say as an individual as well. Sustainability strategies, as it says in the report, help to ensure that present day economic development and resource use doesn't come at the expense of future generations or the depletion of natural resources. And the state governments therefore developed their discussion paper to start that conversation, and it's important that we get involved with that conversation as well. Particularly important is that we use measures that are meaningful in terms of not just assessing the financial bottom line, but also the health and well-being, the ecosystem services, a more broad range of metrics. For example, it says in the report that social factors like poverty, food security, access to education, decent work and safe and resilient communities are all concerns for sustainability action. I recall that when they look specifically at things like GDP as a metric, they're not taking into account a full list of considerations. So one example was when the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened in Alaska, the GDP increased significantly because of all the trade that was associated with cleaning up from an oil spill. Well, an oil spill isn't good for the economy. So even though it looks on paper like, you know, the chart is going upwards, in fact, it's not very good. So that's why it's important to have alternative measures. Another example would be if somebody takes up smoking every time that they purchase cigarettes, that's increasing the GDP. Every time they go to the doctor because of their health ills that are caused by smoking, that increases GDP. But that's not a meaningful way of assessing the health and well-being of an entire community just by looking at the financial metrics like GDP. So that's why alternative measures like the UN Sustainable Development Goals are important, and that's why it's important that we have our say. So I just wanted to make the point that we're in Kingborough very lucky for the natural advantages that we have, the natural assets, the cultural assets, and also the incredible people that we have. But it's really important that we protect those things and enhance them for the future. So it's not just a short-term vision, it's a long-term vision. Particularly important, I believe that we have something like 500 young people not in education, employment and training within the municipality, and so working towards a system where anybody who wants a job can get one is fundamentally important. That's why I personally think that the UN Sustainable Development Goal regarding decent work is an important one. And I think we should also think about long-term sustainability in terms of the natural environment and the biodiversity crisis, that this council itself acknowledges that we're in a climate change emergency and we're also in a biodiversity crisis. So all those things put together, we are now at the stage, I think, where, and particularly we're looking at this where we're seeing more frequent and severe high energy weather events. We're going into summer now, we're all aware of this. Now is the time that we really need to be adapting to a changing climate. And that requires concerted effort and investment, but it also requires a shared vision where we can all get on the same page and on the same boat, so to speak, paddling in the same direction. So that's why I think this is an important opportunity and one that I look forward to Council being involved in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Are there any further contributions? If not, I'll just make a brief one. Thank you to our staff who have prepared this paper. I think that it's very important that as a council that we do engage with the consultation on the Tasmanian sustainability strategy, and particularly if you look at some of the goals that that they highlight in the discussion paper, where they talk about health and well-being as being one of the goals, that everyone in the community has an opportunity to live a healthy and active life and be supported in their connections to people, to place, to culture. And as the closest layer of government to the community, I think we're very well placed with the programs that we run to be able to contribute to those goals. And so it's really important that we do respond on behalf of our community as to how we can do our part, and also further continue to show the community that we're not just about that old cliche of roads, rates and rubbish that is, always bandied around, but also in relation to education and skills. That was one of the other goals that was identified. In terms of, obviously, climate and renewable energy, I think one of the things that we can be very proud of here in Kingborough is that we have had excellent environmental stewardship, and we have a range of strategies that I think put us ahead of some of the other councils in terms of the way that we view our natural environment and protecting it here in Kingborough, that we can already be proud of. So I'm looking forward to this submission that they close on Friday. So thank you to the staff who will now put together a submission on our behalf, and the community will be able to access that submission because the Tasmanian Government will place all of those on the website as part of the consultation for the development of their final strategy. This is just the second part out of 4, but a very important one. Having said that, Councillor Gladwright, would you like to sum up? No, thank you very much. I'll put the recommendation now as printed on page 8, moved by Councillor Gladwright, seconded by Councillor Cordova. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Takes us to page 28, notices of motion. There were no notices of motion, and now we come to, wow, this is a record. It's not on my, sorry, beg your pardon, it's not on my sheet. When the cheat sheet's wrong, it's when you get, sorry, we are on page something. Page 28. We're on appendices, and the recommendation is that the appendices attached to the agenda be received and noted. Got a mover in Councillor Street and a seconder in Councillor Fox. Questions in relation to the appendices? Councillor Fox.
I have no questions.
No questions. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was about the River Derwent Ferry Expansion Project Steering Committee meeting, the 29th of August, on the General Manager's activities. And my specific question is about when do we get to be a part of the ferry expansion? When are they opening the doors on the ferry for Kingborough?
I can probably assist with that. There are two bodies of work that have been taking place in relation to the ferry expansion. The Greater Hobart Mayors received $20 million of funding from the federal government in the last election in order to expand the infrastructure for ferries in the Greater Hobart area. And as part of that, a report was commissioned by a company called Stantec, who have experience in providing feedback on ferry infrastructure. They went and looked at a range of sites, and certainly amongst those was Kingborough was in the mix with that. But I think what is pretty obvious is that the $20 million will only go so far, and there are sort of 6 or 8 sites as part of that. At the same time, the state government, who are of course the providers of the ferry service, or the funders of the ferry service, have been doing this work, which they are now looking at the work that we also did through the Greater Hobart Mayors, hence the steering committee, and they looked more broadly at a greater number of sites, and they're sort of narrowing that down as well. What we need to really nut out is it's not just about the provision of the services, about the infrastructure, but it's also about the state government commitment to funding the services then to service wherever those new ferries go. I will say in relation to ferries coming to Kingborough that we do have some challenges with Kingston Beach. It's not as simple as you might think in terms of the climate in that area and the tide in particular. So, that there is work continuing in relation to that, but I don't know whether the General Manager would like to add anything else.
Through you, Mayor, I think that's a good summation of the current state of play, except to say that we've had one inaugural meeting of the Ferry Reference Group. I'm a member of that. And we have a draft terms of reference, and Councillor Cordova's question tonight has reminded me that I will circulate a copy of that draft terms of reference to all councillors so that you know the sorts of things that we will likely to be discussing moving forward.
Thank you. And just one more question, if I might, Mayor, is about the 18th of September regarding the music festival. Are there any details about that that can be shared?
Nothing concrete that I can share at the moment, but Maddie Peaty, who came to see the Deputy Mayor and the General Manager and I, is well known as an events organiser and the founder of the Farmgate Market and a number of other successful events around southern Tasmania. She is in the very early stages of a concept for a music festival in Kingborough that would be held over summer, but not in 2024, we're talking 2025. So she wanted to come and have some initial discussions about, the logistics of that and get some information from us as to what would be required in terms of permits, community consultation, and that sort of thing. So that would be very exciting to have another event coming to Kingborough, and I think it solidified for the Deputy Mayor and I that increasingly that we have organisers of events looking at the facilities that we have here in Kingborough and saying, I want to come down here and run an event because you've got the population to support it and you've got the infrastructure as well. So that was certainly very early, and we look forward to any further discussions about that. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to ask a question about, on page 33, the continuous improvement policy. Is that still on track to be finished the next month or so?
The General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, Councillor Bain, it's on track, but not necessarily for next month or so. Council might recall that part of the way that we're going to address that is to employ an officer in that space. There's provision in the current budget, but the timing of that employment is not until later this calendar year.
And if I can just add to that, I think there's sort of a chain of events which have delayed it, and part of that was needing to appoint a new director in that area, which would also have some feed into this. So, yeah. But we're certainly, it's a passion of mine, so we're certainly very committed to it, and we'll see that slightly delayed. But and I know that probably the former Kingborough Ratepayers Association would be watching this and knowing that they were very passionate about this also, and we can assure them that that it will definitely still be going ahead. Any further questions? Councillor Dean.
Sorry, just a very quick update, if I might, from the Director of Engineering Services around Woodbridge Hill Road and where we might be on that one. Thanks.
Mr. Reeve, you might get the word imminent.
Through you, Mayor. No, you won't be getting that word, but I can give you a little bit of an update. So we did a bit of backwards and forwards between us and the Department of State Growth in terms of that particular one. If you remember rightly there, we put a submission in there to reduce the speed limit to 70 kilometres an hour Woodbridge Road, which they replied to us to say no. However, they were happy to actually entertain it being reduced further to 60 kilometres an hour, which is what our new submission actually is, which we have just submitted, or just about to submit. So we'll wait to see whether they will actually sign off on that. We do have a number of other roads that we're putting forward as well for similar speed reductions, which we were going to put into a job lot, but I've said let's just get the Woodbridge Road one done first, bearing in mind how long it's actually taken, and hopefully get a positive response back from the Transport Commission.
Councillor Dean.
Would you mind just quickly speaking to that process that they've rejected the 70k and the local community, or obviously I imagine would actually be preferable for the 60, but maybe they put in for 70 thinking that that was a more realistic option. So if the Transport Commission coming back and saying actually 60, why couldn't they just, you know, what it sounds like a really weird way of going about things.
Through you, Mayor.
Mr. Reeve.
Yeah, look, it's difficult to actually defend, I suppose, in terms of how they might actually approach these things. I do have some strong viewpoints that you should have consistency across the state in terms of speed limits and applying speed limits, and that's certainly the information we would give back to anybody who wishes to actually change speed limits, and it still would be the information that we would give back. So certainly the intention of a 70 kilometre speed limit was in keeping with what State Growth had actually done on the Sandfly Road, which is a very similar road, which is the reason why we actually, I guess, directed it in to that speed limit. However, they, I guess, had some different viewpoints when they did their own assessment on the road. But being a local government road, they require us to actually put the submission in as compared to not.
Any further discussion? If not, I will put the recommendation moved by Councillor Street, seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Notices of motion on page 28. At the time that the agenda was compiled, there were no notices of motion. And we are now at confirmation of items to be dealt with in closed session. Confirmation of minutes and applications for leave of absence. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Fox, seconder in Councillor Bain. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. So that means that in accordance with Kingborough Council Meetings Audio Recording Guidelines Policy, the recording of the open session of the meeting will now cease at 6:04 p.m. So thank you very much to everyone who has been listening along at home, and